Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. The involvement of Western interests in Nigeria's war against terrorism has for more than 5 years been a subject of intense public scrutiny. The argument for or against have always been whether or not these interests were getting involved for the sake of humanity, such as was demonstrated by the global outpouring of emotions that followed the abduction of the Chibok schoolgirls in April 2014. Or are there other interests being served? The refusal of former U.S. President Barack Obama's administration to sell arms to Nigeria for combating Boko Haram in the wake of that incident has always been cited by some analysts as an unusually antagonistic position taken by a traditional ally. And now, former British Prime Minister David Cameron's new book appears to have stirred the honest nest again for a conversation around all of these and other issues of national interest. We're now being joined from our Abuja studio by Jideofor Adibe, a professor of political science, founding editor of the quarterly academic journal African Renaissance, founding co-editor of Journal of African Foreign Affairs, and chairman of the board of trustees of the think tank Rogan Leadership Foundation. Jideofor Adibe, welcome to the morning show. Good to have you again.
Yeah, good morning, Ruben.
Good morning,
Laila.
Good morning, my brother. Good to have you here. Well, I mean, you must have listened to my introduction.
Thank you very much.
What do you make of the protest, if I may say so, or if I may use a better word, the rejoinder by former President Goodluck Jonathan to the book written by Prime Minister Cameron, titled For the Record, in which he tried to put President Jonathan on the spot. And President Jonathan has since responded to say that it is indeed not true that he rejected any offer of help. You know, I don't want to comment on that, being a stakeholder in the matter myself, but you are the analyst, and you must have been following the story. I would like to have your take. What do you think?
Thank you very much. Ruben, there was something you mentioned in your introduction, whether there was more to it. You referred to Barack Obama's reluctance, the reluctance of the U.S. to sell weapons. I would actually like to take you back to what happened in Mali in 2012. During the time, there's some groups in northern Mali were trying to separate. The African Union at that time, they had African Union supported AFISMA, to help fight the separatists in northern Mali. It was then believed that the United Nations was dragging its foot until France, the AFISMA was being overwhelmed, forcing the Malian government to invite France, and France was able to flush them out within 2 weeks or so. So the subtext, some of people believe at that time that it was a deliberate attempt by former colonial power to let the former colonies that, look, you still need us. So I see a kind of a thread in what Cameron was trying to say, that, look, we are your former colonial powers. We were your former colonial masters, and we were willing to help you, and you simply were not willing. That is one way of, reading that text, the desire by a former colonial power to bring itself back on the picture, and more or less letting you people know that you cannot do with us. That's actually one way of looking at it. Another way is that when I look at the rebuttal by President Jonathan, I was quite impressed. One, by the direct nature of very pointed rebuttal in a very nice tone, and reminding him that he had made a similar observation which Theresa May, the former prime minister, the prime minister that succeeded Cameron, rebutted. So I think it depends again on how we look at it. But if Britain offered help, which Jonathan did not accept, there is still a lot of opportunities for UK to do the good thing. We still have the Dapchi girls. We still have about 112 of the Chibok girls remaining. They are more than welcome to go and do the job.
But Unfortunately, it can't really always work that way, right? Because now we're talking about the politics of insecurity that's going on here. During this entire situation with the Chibok girls, for example, in conversation that I had with the founder of a private security company that was brought into this case, the person went into detail on the method that they proposed in order for them to tackle Boko Haram in certain local government areas and how that was rejected by the government. We were also told about intel, and there were stories going out about intel and how the government knew or had some sort of intel about this abduction taking place, yet did not act on it. So when you have things like this floating around, and of course you may also have your own proof, like I believe I do, it's kind of hard to just see this as a situation whereby someone is coming out with memoirs that we can have the ex-president rejecting. We actually need answers here. So my question to you is, what are the repercussions of a situation like this, if proven true?
Well, we don't know. First of all, also remember you're a sovereign nation. It is possible that the conditions attached to such intervention, you might feel it's going to compromise national security. We don't really know because Jonathan has, denied that such a conversation took place. As a matter of fact, Jonathan said that he wrote to Barack Obama, wrote to French president, wrote to Israeli prime minister, and also to British prime minister asking for help. And he said if he could write asking for help, was it then possible that he could also be rejecting the help? We haven't heard the position of the other people mentioned until we hear their position. But also, I also want you to take the context into consideration. Any sovereign nation, when you want to bring foreign intervention in your internal situation, you also have to be sensitive to a number of things. One, the conditions attached. You should become. And also another context was the prevailing conspiracy theories of the time. I can understand why the Jonathan government was a little bit lethargic in following up on the Chibok girls. Don't forget at that point, there was a widespread belief in the southern parts or by Jonathan supporters that Boko Haram was just an attempt, to undermine the Jonathan presidency. And people will always give you evidence that how could 276 people be abducted and nobody could see the trace?
Yeah,
so you will be looking at it in the northern part.
It's 2005 days today, and the Chibok girls are still missing.
I'm coming. You have to look at the context of that situation. In the northern part of the country, there was strong belief that the Boko Haram was either being supported by the Jonathan government to depopulate to ensure that depopulate the north ahead of the 2015 poll. Others said they were not interested in really fighting because it was considered a northern problem. You can also look at it the other way. More than 5 years or 4 years after Jonathan is gone, you will have thought, if those prevailing conspiracy theories in the north were true, that by now the Boko Haram would have been routed. But what we know now is that about 8 local governments have been recaptured. So what we have to do is that we have to take into the context of that time before we push any blame further. And also the fact that Jonathan, I'm not his spokesman, I was one of his critics. I'm not saying what we have to do is until we hear the other position, French president was mentioned, Barack Obama was mentioned, and the Israeli prime minister was mentioned as people contacted by the former president asking for help. Until they were able to collaborate or deny, then we will not be able to know, how to situate our own position.
Well, Jideofor Adibe, thank you. You referred to Mali, you referred to Israel, you referred to France. As someone who was a spokesman for the Nigerian president at that time, I can comment extensively on all of this, including meetings we had with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in his office. I was there. I have all the records, but I'm not here as a spokesman for the Nigerian government. I'm here, doing my job as a journalist. But I would like to ask you, there was a point that President Jonathan raised about how the Same-Sex Prohibition Act of 2014, how it became a major issue, on the basis of which many of these, foreign countries decided to distance themselves from the Jonathan administration. Do you really believe that the anti-gay, gay sex law did a lot of damage to the Jonathan administration, or what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. I know you followed that discussion. When it was passed, I recall it was David Mark, the then Senate president, who got very angry because some of them were Canadian Prime Minister Barack Obama, but they were threatening to withdraw aids. And I remember a very furious David Mark was saying, let them keep their aids. We're not going to do it. It is not something that is, compatible with our own cultural ethos. So we don't really know, but I don't think the West was pushing it because it is gay or, lesbian thing. But it's more like they're looking at it in the context of protecting minority rights, which, there are cultural issues. Until recently, you also couldn't get into same-sex marriage. I think it was only in 2011 or there, about 2013, that the UK approved it. So what happened? And I had followed a number of the cases in European people who had gone from UK to sue for. They went to Strasbourg under human rights. People who went to other countries like Canada in those days, same-sex, they contracted marriage, and they tried to legalize it in the UK. They were all turned around. Even in Strasbourg, they lost all the cases. So you could then be asking if they were trying to push this on our truth when we had not reached that stage where it will be culturally permissible, then you will be wondering why then it took them so long to get to that position. They only got legalized in 2011 or 2013. I can't remember precisely what happened all those years of agitation. So I think it was a major issue, but for the Western countries, but they are looking at it, in my own opinion, in the context of protecting minority rights. And we were looking at it in the context of our religious, spiritual, and cultural beliefs.
Okay, Professor Adibe, we'll take a short commercial break now, and then we'll return and come back to you. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And still with us is Professor Jideofor Adibe, a professor of political science, founding editor of the quarterly academic journal African Renaissance, and founding co-editor of the Journal of African Foreign Affairs. Now, Professor Adibe, well, we've been talking about David Cameron's book, for the record, and the reactions by President Goodluck Jonathan. Well, I guess we'll all get a chance eventually to read the book itself and to be able to have an informed opinion. But let's move on to other issues. Leila, you want to take him on?
Absolutely. A very recent topical issue that's going on is the kidnapping of 6 students, female students, and 2 teachers at a school in Kaduna State. Now, this morning, early hours of this morning, the kidnappers have now come out to increase their amount in ransom from 50 million naira to 80 million naira, making it 10 million naira per person, saying that this is on the basis of radio reports that they heard. So in terms of tackling insecurity now, we're faced with a problem where a story hits the media and it may just instigate perpetrators to put more force towards their actions. How do we create a balance whereby we're informing the public, but also ensuring that we are still protecting the lives and the security of people that are falling victims of certain activities that should not be?
Yeah, thank you. I think the security situation is really something the current government should have a second look at. Until recently, it has based its own credentials on the fact that it has been able to capture the territories seized by Boko Haram. It said it had degraded them. Now we do know that Boko Haram is in control of about 8 local governments in Borno State. When they came on board, the major security situation was Boko Haram. Now kidnapping, armed robbery, Northwest is not safe, Southwest is not safe. The government should also look at this as a social contract between the citizens, in which a big part of that social contract is that the state provides protection for lives and property in exchange for the governments giving it support and paying taxes. So if the state abdicates its responsibility in this social contract, then it is calling for chaos. It simply has to face the reality that it has a major issue on its hand. There is no point living in denial and telling us you have technically defeated a group when that group has constantly reinvented itself and has moved from attacking soft targets to hard targets. And now we have issue of banditry in the Northwest, kidnapping in a scale that we had not seen before. So it is a major situation. No one is safe. Before the election, the governor of the president's own state, Katsina, did say that even himself as the governor was not safe. At that time, the then governor of Zamfara said he was willing for a state of emergency to be declared in his situation. From all indications, nothing has changed. If anything, things seem to have been deteriorating.
Well, Professor Adibe, there is a story, front page of This Day today, quoting the governor of Katsina State, Governor Aminu Masari, saying, "We're discussing with bandits to end violence in Northwest." And there is a proposed meeting between him and his counterpart in the Maradi region of Niger to meet with bandits, from both sides, from Nigeria and Niger. And he says that the bandits have understandable reasons for their actions, whatever that means. Do you think that, governors should be sitting down and engaging in dialogue with bandits? Since these bandits are known, why are they not arrested and the full weight of the law brought to bear upon them? Is it a good strategy, this dialogue that Governor Masari and some other governors in the Southwest seem to be exploring as an option?
Yeah, Ruben, we have been using this stick approach for too long. If you are a governor, and don't forget that even though you are the chief security officer of that state, you are effectively not actually the chief security officer because you don't control the police. So if a problem remains intractable, you can explore all options. But for me, what that tells us is that it is now time for us to revisit the whole debate about state police and community policing. We can no longer, at this stage, in my own opinion, believe that the nature of the police force we have will be able to offer protection to citizens across the country. Across the country, we are having more of the cases of ungoverned spaces. You can see when you have to enter into a negotiation position with the bandits, it is a concession that you cannot defeat them. And we have seen it. They have tried, probably, over the years. And when you cannot defeat an insurgency, when you cannot defeat a terrorist group, when you cannot defeat bandits, sometimes you have no option than to negotiate. But that also negotiation tells us about the weakness of the state. The state is simultaneously too weak in terms of protecting its citizens, in terms of doing the aspects it ought to do under the social contract theory. At the same time, too strong, because the coercive aspects of the state, especially when it comes to attacking citizens, picking up citizens that maybe say something it doesn't like, the Shogoles, is too strong. So increasingly, we are seeing people like Oshibonjo beginning now to sing a different tune. Yeah, he had always supported state police, saying now we need states to be, more powers to be devolved to the state. Maybe that is, they may not like the restructuring argument, but increasingly, that may be the direction the country will go. The situation is that the entire country is becoming ungovernable. And for as long as this situation remains, we will continue to have cases of more Nigerians delinking from the state and regarding the state as either an enemy, as an obstacle to their own progress.
Absolutely, and it's reported that about 40,000 people in recent months have had to flee the Northwest because of this conflict. And even to worsen it, a UN reporter that was here, special reporter that was around recently, described Nigeria's insecurity situation as, what was it? She said, a pressure cooker of internal conflict. Now, what's in the reports recently as well is the revision of force of Order 237 by the police force, whereby now they're trying to introduce stun guns to reduce the amount of force that is being applied. What is your take on this new approach that the IG has come out speaking about to introduce stun guns and get rid of the amount of unnecessary bullets that are often flying around?
I'm not too sure it's going to, my personal opinion. We have had a number of initiatives from different police IGs. Their successes, I'm not too sure. We are very good in initiatives. We don't like good ideas. It's their implementations that are the problem. So until they start to implement them, we'll see if it works. But even with stun gun, they are complaining that they cannot fight bandits because they are not properly armed. Now, if you give them the stun guns, is it going to make any difference?
But do you think, Professor, it's because they're not properly armed, or do you think it's because of a lack of intelligence?
I think it's a combination of both, and the fact that the increasing more Nigerians are, whether we like it or not, are delinquent, are losing faith in the whole Nigeria project. And for as long as people do not begin to question even the viability, or rather to continue to contest the basis of that statehood, not even nationhood, these problems will continue. And that, for me, goes back to the fact that we got the state building, nation building wrong. And for as long as we get this nation building wrong, and there's intense crisis in the nation building project, any problem, any solution you throw at that problem will continue, quickly mutate to become part of the problem. So we need to go back to the basis. Instead of deceiving ourselves, you have decimated Boko Haram, you have done this. We should go back to that basis. And I'm glad the vice president seems to be shifting the ground. I mean, some of the travels he has now, he may have also helped him to realize that in the final analysis, his own core constituencies were alienated or largely alienated from the type of politics he was playing. So in essence, we should be able, if we really want the problems of this country to be solved, that we go back to the basis, create a nation, and then we take it from there. Whether you call it Boko Haram or IPOP or the new bandits, there are people who have effectively delinked from Nigerian state and regarding the state as an enemy. And there are others who are still within that state structure, but are delinking, and that process of saying, well, whatever happens, it happens. I don't think it's born like this. And for as long as this situation remains, I doubt if we can move forward. So it's either the country now, we have little no option. If the word restructuring, I don't believe is a magic elixir that will solve all our problems.
Well, Professor Adibe,
as long as we are unwilling.
Professor Adibe, we'll take a short break, a short commercial break, and we'll come back to you. Stay tuned. Don't go away. It's still The Morning Show. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And still with us in our Abuja studio is Jideofor Adibe, a professor of political science, founding editor of the quarterly academic journal African Renaissance. Now, Professor Adibe, before we went on break, I was going to take you back to the point you made about state police and community policing. You will recall that in his October 1 address, Independence Day speech, President Buhari devoted a lot of, so many paragraphs to the subject of security. And he talked about the Police Trust Fund Establishment Act, which he had signed, and the fact that this is meant to, ensure greater efficiency, service delivery on the part of the police. In addition to the fact that the Nigeria Police is also recruiting about 10,000 constables. Now, this is part of the attempt by the administration to make the police more effective. Do you think that if this is done, there will be no need for, calls for state police, community policing, particularly if, the trust fund helps to raise the level of performance of the police? Because state police, community police these days is becoming almost like a slogan, almost like that other notorious phrase, security architecture. Security is something you just throw out like that without thinking through it properly. What do you think?
I think, Ruben, that is going to help. Every little helps. Every little effort helps. But I also passionately believe that if you look at the question of ungoverned and undergoverned spaces, and the fact that you see them growing across the country. So the whole argument is that since we have vigilantes across the country, virtually all the state governments now have sort of vigilante groups. Why don't we then formalize this, using these vigilante groups as the backbones? Because theoretically, they all know the communities better. And there is also the politics of intergovernmental relations. Those who control, if you are a PDP man, for example, government, and the federal government is APC, you have very little leverage. The commissioner of police may be changed at any time, and more or less you depend on the IGP, the Inspector General of Police, being able to respond to your own calls. So the efforts to improve the well-being of the police, I think, is a laudable one. We should encourage it. It will help. But I also think that we should go beyond that and then ask ourselves why we are having increasing incidents of ungoverned and undergoverned spaces in the country. So they are not mutually exclusive. They can complement one another by going into the route of the community police and then bringing issue of police trust fund and other measures to improve the welfare of the police.
Absolutely. And as a whole, Professor Adibe, how would you rate this administration's efforts to curb matters of insecurity? Just in general, what is your take and your observation on how we've gone about all the matters of insecurity that we've been facing, let's say since 2015, actually?
1 to 15?
Since 2015.
How do you want me to rate
Since 2015, Professor.
Okay. I will rate them 2 out of 10, where 10 is excellent and 2 is extremely poor. That's my own assessment. Nobody is safe. Nobody is safe anywhere. Even in Abuja, even in the highbrow areas, nobody is safe. So I think I'm actually being generous as a teacher to rate them 2 over 10.
Okay, but let's talk about something else. The Buhari administration is proposing to restore toll gates. Toll gates that were removed years back by the Obasanjo administration. Because at that time, the Obasanjo administration had introduced what it called a 5% fuel tax. Now the Buhari administration is proposing to return those toll gates because the Minister of Power, the Minister of Works, Babatunde Fashola, says that we don't have any other option than tolling. What do you think? Why is it that we keep going back and forth? And then there's another tax that is being proposed by the National Assembly, what they call the communication service tax, when already we have a 5% telecom VAT, 5% VAT on telecommunication services. Although the National Assembly is saying, well, that communication service tax on SMS, MMS, and pay-per-view television is their own way of, going around the proposed increase in VAT. Do you think all of this makes sense, or do you think this is just an attempt by policymakers to impose further hardship on the average Nigerian through multiple taxation that cannot be properly explained?
Well, I don't think it's a deliberate attempt to further impoverize the citizens. But when you look at the totality of what is happening, virtually every sector, including electricity, they are talking about increasing the electric tariff when there has not been any commensurate increase in the number of days people receive light. And virtually everywhere, if you are a small business, they tax you with environmental tax, refuse removal, 1 million of them. Correspondingly, because this is a social contract, what is the state offering in return? If you look at people's income, even with the so-called 30,000 naira wage increase, in real terms, in terms of the basket of goods, the 30,000 can get you today. That's less than what you will get in 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So as they are bringing all these measures to beef up because of the decline in state revenue, especially revenue from oil, and they are doing all they can, to find ways of getting more money. I can understand that. But you should also, while you do that, you will also tell yourself, in terms of this contract, that I'm supposed to protect lives and property and provide an enabling environment for people to go about their businesses. In exchange for my asking this, am I upping what I'm bringing on the table? Or am I just taxing and taxing and taxing without commensurately improving on my own social provisioning, what I'm offering the citizens? I think that's where the problem, this lacuna, this lack of that only one side is providing. You are making constant demand on the citizens without a commensurate effort on your own part to increase what you're bringing to the table. Instead of that, what the government is bringing on the table is increasingly diminishing. Every individual seems to be a government. You provide your own water, you provide your own security, virtually everything, you provide your own light. So the question then is, if the government is not in violation, if it's in violation of these social contracts, what right will it then have to go after citizens who decide, well, since you've breached the contract, I too will breach my own contract, the contract. So we have to go back and look at it in a holistic terms. The government is a contract. You can ask for all these increases. And I can assure you, if the citizens see, for example, that the quality of life is improving, security is improving, it doesn't really matter if you are asking them to make more sacrifices. More people will be willing to sacrifice. But it is only when people don't see what difference it makes, then they will question why you are continuing to ask them to make more sacrifices.
Absolutely. And actually, when we had the FIRS chairman on the show, Babatunde Fowler, he described it as a chicken and egg situation, which kind of poses the difficulty that we face when it comes to this discussion on taxation and how we go about it. But Professor, I'd like to bring us on to another topical issue, which is the president's recent trip to South Africa. Despite the recent xenophobic attacks that had over 600 Nigerians repatriated from the country by a private airline owner. And even though we managed to come to 32 new trade agreements, Professor, I would like to ask you, do you think that trip was, one, worth it, two, at the right time? Because many believe that even though it was a reciprocal visit, he should have cancelled it to take a stand with his country. What's your take?
Well, incidentally, the government's handling of the South Africa is one area I'm giving them very high credit. On a scale of 1 to 10 in their handling, I'll give them 9 over 10. And that's my personal opinion. You don't so much follow the emotions of the citizens in situations like this. Government should always act rationally. I did not support those who were saying, look, break diplomatic relations with South Africa. I think the government did the right thing. He sent somebody. He even met the South African president to apologize. And then it followed up with the government going to South. I think he did it at the right time. And it's one area that I must give the Buhari government credit. I think they did well in that area.
Well, Jideofor Adibe, I mean, you are primarily a teacher, as a professor of political science. 3 days ago, it was World Teachers' Day, right? And the theme was, young teachers, the future of the profession. What's your assessment of the teaching profession in Nigeria? And what do you think of the plea by the Nigerian Union of Teachers that President Buhari should assent to the bill before him, that has been presented before him, to ensure the review of the retirement age of teachers and education officers from age 60 to age 65? And do you think that a teacher's reward is still in heaven, or it's now here on earth?
Thank you. Ruben, we say in the UK that only those who can teach. But I agree with you, there are problems in the teaching profession, just like you have in every profession in this country. The teaching profession is a product of its environment in Nigeria, just like the police force, the journalists. So some of the problems the teaching profession faces in the country are systemic. Some are also internal, you know. There are people who are just like in any profession who have no business being in that profession, being there. When a doctor who went into medicine out of passion touches you, you will know that a doctor is dealing with you. When somebody who went into it out of as a cowboy because he thought he would make something there, or there is no other place to go, you will also know they will get easily angry and agitated. So that's the way I will, you know, define the teaching profession. You, just like every other profession, you have the good, the bad, and the ugly. But I think anything to do in the general practice across the world now is that people are living longer, people are living healthier, I mean, at least in the Western world. And increasingly, people are reviewing retirement age. There was a time when, if you're approaching 60, you're already working with having a walking stick. But these days, you can see somebody who is almost 90. You know, I was with Paddy Banjo the other day, more than 90 years old, very vibrant. And are you going to ask somebody like that to go and sit down? Because he's, no. I think, look at Donald Trump. Look at all the front runners in the U.S. Presidential race. You know, Bernie Sanders, you can't call them young men, but they are all vibrant. So I think it makes sense, not just for the teaching profession, but to review the retirement age of people, civil servants, teachers, and across the board.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Jideofor Adibe. Leila, you agree with me? We've enjoyed the conversation with him very much this morning. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.